A lot of the leadership models talk about a point in time, but they don't really have a growth mechanism in terms of a really strong reflective practice, because what got you here is not going to get you there. The biggest thing that gets in the way of influence is ego. And if we spend all our time in a dysregulated state, we will operate for a while. We can hold it for a while, but at some point we'll burn out.
What one key piece of advice would you like to give to everyone watching and listening today?
Yeah, one of the things I always talk to people about is, as part of my reflective practice, I ask people to go, what's working well? How can I do more? And what's not working? And what do I need to change, review, reduce, or eliminate?
Hello, and welcome to the Business Growth Show, where I interview successful entrepreneurs on all areas of business and how to utilize them for exponential growth. My name is Athin Cassiotis. I'm a business growth expert, investor, and international speaker, where I help business owners grow and scale to create wealth and freedom. Today, I have an awesome guest. Her name is Kylee Leota, and she is a transformational leadership expert, leadership speaker, executive coach, facilitator, advisor, and author of an upcoming book, Infinite Leadership. And Kylee is the founder and chief vision officer of Elements for Success, a global organization delivering transformational experiences to individuals, teams, and organizations. Earl Nightingale defines success as the progressive realization of a worthy goal or ideal. And Kylee wishes to empower people of all ages so that they can develop the confidence, skills, and tools they require to live a life of their design and purpose. And she believes that you have the knowledge within yourself to create success, and gives you the right tools in your toolbox to help you make these goals and ideals reality. And as a lifelong learner and educator, it has taught at all ages and stage in sectors of the schooling, including guest lecturing at tertiary level, and she consults and works collaboratively with psychiatrists, psychologists, and other professionals to create sustainable behavior change for her clients in her coaching role. Welcome, Kylee Leota. Thank you for being on the Business Growth Show.
Oh, Athin, it's so lovely to see you again. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I'm sure it's going to be an amazing show for everyone watching and listening today. And you are a successful entrepreneur. So for those people who don't know who you are, just, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you and your journey.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily have the traditional entrepreneur journey, because people, they'll go in and they're like, oh, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, or I hated school, or I did all this kind of thing. I actually had a government job for over 20 years and thought I would probably be doing that forever. And then I had an injury that made me have to recalibrate my journey in 2019. And I remember sitting there going, I don't even know who I am without this identity of this role that I had. So there was a lot of deep diving, a lot of maybe a few blood, sweat, and tears. And I actually had this realization that I took all the parts of the job that I loved and left all the parts of the job that I really didn't like, which was a lot because it was a government job, and became a business owner. And it was a few months in, I'm like, well, actually, I like doing this and I like doing this. And so became an accidental entrepreneur, I guess, in a way, because I now have real estate. I have different development apps. I've got a few different businesses that I play around in. And I also on a speaking circuit and doing a few different things. And I love all of them. And I think that's the common pattern of entrepreneurship, is that we all love all of the things. And we're actually quite good at juggling a number of balls. And if we're only juggling one, we're probably not as comfortable as if we're juggling a couple. The tricky part is to find how many is the right amount before it starts to get a bit chaotic, right? But helping people, and I love working with entrepreneurs because I love their brains. I love how that works. It's usually busy, fast-paced, innovative, creative. And my job is to help them get to that journey faster and intact, because the entrepreneurship journey can be pretty fatiguing, and it's pretty easy to burn out, because people talk about doing that energy that comes, the drain from doing things that you hate, or things that are uncomfortable, or things that are traumatic, or anything. People don't talk about the burnout that comes from doing things that you love. It's very easy. I love what I do. I could do it all day long. So, we've got to also be mindful about that. So I ended up in entrepreneurship from a long government career, went into business kind of as a fresh, so I didn't go to business school, didn't do all those kind of things, but just worked to my strengths, the zone of genius that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about. So live in my zone of genius wherever possible, because that's what creates the innovation and creative, and being a model for others to be able to pave a pathway to make it easier for others to get on that journey. and I love what I do. And so now I play in a few different spaces, and I love each of them equally, and love traveling around and meeting incredible humans and helping them create that life, like you mentioned in the bio.
Yeah, awesome. Love it, Kylie. What an amazing story there. And yes, I'm very similar. I like to juggle a few different businesses and things like that, and enjoy that juggling act. Everyone's built a little bit differently, not for everybody, but yeah, it can be fun and better,
Mm.
for the people that are built in a similar way.
Yeah, and in my government job, I worked in education for a long time, and I realized it was one of those reflective, as you do those deep dive reflections when you come to transition points in your life. And what I realized was the only reason I lasted in education for as long as I did is because my job relied a lot of innovation and creativity. So I worked in disability, complex behavior, and trauma. So those kids that did not have traditional pathways of schooling. So every day I had to be innovative, I had to be creative, how to get a kid off a roof, how to get that knife out of that kid, keeping everyone safe, amongst another thing, the buildings getting set on fire, a few different things that were a little bit, required a lot of innovation from my part. And I think if I'd gone to a traditional teaching role, I probably would not have been as successful. But my success came from the opportunity that I, on reflection, lived in innovation and creativity for 20 years in the role that I had. So now I get to apply that innovation and creativity in different areas, but still with that humanistic base and making sure that at the foundation of it is understanding ourselves and behavior and being able to move that forward for ourselves and what that looks like.
Yeah, I love that. Can definitely relate with my, being in my job for 10 years, similar thing, and then things change. But yeah, we move on. So, and I know you're all big on infinite leadership now as what you're
Yeah.
doing. So tell us a bit about this concept, right? Because what does that actually mean to you for infinite leadership?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that happens when we get into a leadership role, well, it certainly happened for me. I didn't get any leadership training until I became a leader. I got promoted on the skills that I had, with maybe some fingers crossed hope that I had the skills to be a leader, and didn't get any training. And I think the other part of it too is I also have been in positions where you talk to other leaders in the group and you're like, so how long have you been in this role? They're like 30 odd years. And I'm like, right, okay. So once you get a position, what happens? You do the job for a while. People that are aspirant will look for the next job, and the evolution. But that comes with having a really strong reflective practice and understanding the concept of infinite leadership is it's a bit like that Kaizen model, that continuous improvement, that we need to be okay with where we're at, but continuously grow and aspire to be more. And that's the same in leadership. And what I realize is a lot of the leadership models talk about a point in time, but they don't really have a growth mechanism in terms of a really strong reflective practice, because what got you here is not going to get you there, but we're going to teach you to this part right now of where you are. So personality profiling tools talk about who you are in this particular role right now. But what happens if you go to a different role and actually present differently? And so how do you reflect on that and how do you grow? Or do you get stuck because, hang on, somebody over here told me I was this and now I need to be this over here. And now I've got a different team that don't operate the same way, but I've only got the skills on how to manage and operate on this team. So the idea of infinite leadership was the fact that my life has been a constant evolution, growing and learning. And it started with, before I needed to worry about everybody else in my leadership, I needed to worry about myself. My self leadership journey was an ongoing evolution. And once we get the concept that learning is infinite and that learning is ongoing, then we then have infinite possibilities and we have infinite opportunities. And often the thing that's holding ourselves back in moving through our journey, whether it be entrepreneurship, whether it be a corporate leadership role, whether it be anything, is our own thinking about that possibilities and opportunities moving forward, which means that somewhere in that infinite model, and each of those letters represents a different pillar. So someone's stuck somewhere in their journey. And so having these pillars to go back to and go, well, is it a big picture thing that I need to look at, or is it this particular pillar that I need to reflect on and reframe? Because the other part of it too is we cannot claim that we don't know stuff from lack of access to information these days, right? You only have to turn on a YouTube channel, you only have to turn on social media. There's so much access. But how do you know what's the right thing for you right now? And so the infinite leadership model creates a pathway for your own journey. Then you can apply it to your team and your organization in terms of how to develop a continuous improvement model for yourself but to create excellence. That's the goal. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, oh my gosh, I want to do a terrible job today. all of us aspire to be excellent and be better than better than we were the day before. So how do we do that? We need a model of practice to do that. And often that's a reflective model. And I think we don't teach that enough. And one of the things that we get stuck in is people get a lot of theory, but how do they make it into practice in their own lives? And that's where that model came from. And it came from my, infinite evolution, and came from my infinite leadership journey, came from my own infinite evolution, was recognizing that some of the patterns that I was repeating in my life came from me getting stuck in one of those pillars and me making the same thing over again and me going, okay, what do I need to do differently to get to the next level, the next level, next level? And now I help people on that journey as well.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. So much conjecture, and I agree that constant evolution, learning that human need of growth, right? And be wanting to better ourselves, which is really, really powerful. You've been talking about these pillars, Kylee, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So tell us more about what these pillars are in your infinite leadership model.
Yeah. So infinite is 8 pillars. So the first one is about identity. And I think where we get stuck in life is we have an identity. And so going back to my own, journey from my job, my identity was wrapped up in the role that I did. And when I could no longer do that role, I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was. And so I had to recreate a new identity. And we'll look at other, you look at famous people and you look at, they go, oh, well, they've got this or well, they've got that. But, who's the identity? What's the qualities and the attributes of the person that you want to be? And what would that, if I was to be that person, what would that identity look like? I would be, if I want to be, I don't know, a 9-figure entrepreneur, well, they're going to be people that are going to be able to have hard conversations. They're going to be able to have people that have confidence. They're going to people that have their own backs. They're going to have, people that have got a really good, they make good choices, or being able to make decisions in high pressure situations, right? So what would I need in my own personal journey, in my own identity, to be able to do those things? What's the work I need to do in that particular space? And Vusi Themba had this beautiful quote that said, identity is man-made, so thereby it can be man-changed. And I think for many of us, we get stuck in an identity that potentially is bestowed upon us, you're the poor student, the terrible student, or you're the class clown, or you're the, in my case, single mum, or the DV victim, or whatever that could look like. And it's very easy. They're all very valid. Like I was a victim of domestic violence. That's a valid identity to hold on to, but it doesn't actually serve me to get where I want to go. So what would my identity look like over here if it was getting me to where I wanted to go? What do I need to review, reflect, and recalibrate on to keep that journey moving forward? So
Yeah.
that's the identity pillar.
I love it. And I'll just add, I love this, right? Identity. I think it's a big shift, right? Because you can only work so much on mindset, but sometimes you need to go, who is the person that I want to be or need to be now, and make that big shift. And then everything just
Yeah,
changes, right? From there
for
building up. So
sure.
very, very key initial pillar. I love it.
Yeah. And if you want to be a person that has a six pack, now the person with a six pack usually is in physical fitness and they usually want to eat well. They usually, unless you're a genetic goddess or god, most of us have to do some work in that regard, right? So if you don't want to do the work, or you don't want those behaviors of somebody who's going to get up and go do those things, then maybe you need to reflect if that's the identity you actually want. So because there's a misalignment often between our behaviors and what we want to be. And it's our behaviors that need to change, or our expectations of that identity that need to change, right? And so we talk about, everyone's got a money story. My mum, and I love my parents to death, but my mum was always like, oh, we don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. We don't have money for that. Well, guess what? We didn't have money for that. So I thought, on the lower end of the scale is I've got to change my money story, because I had this whole idea of being in a government job, safe, secure, right? So I can't possibly have a business because that's not safe and secure. And that's irresponsible as a single mum with 3 kids. So my identity was wrapped in this concept that my parents had unconsciously bestowed upon me, that the only way to be a good parent was to create safety and security by having a good job, or having a government job and having a house and having all this kind of stuff. So the reason I wasn't getting the advancement I wanted is because unconsciously my identity was sitting over here from stories, a narrative that wasn't even mine. It was something that had been bestowed upon me. So now I earn more than my government job, and my children have more safety and security than ever, because I looked at what narratives I needed to break. And what about my identity did I need to move through to get to that next phase of what I wanted to look for?
Yeah, I love that. So true. Looking at those shadows and being able to, yeah, change the narratives there. And
Yeah.
it's awesome now with, being more conscious, right? Like with parents and how we can bestow onto our kids more of this knowledge, right? I think these new
Yeah.
generations the conscious parents are going to be super kids to some extent, right? In how they think,
Yeah.
less holding them back. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of moves me into the next pillar, which is the N, which is nurturing. And because what we are doing is we are making a much more conscious, aware community about our feelings, about all this kind of stuff. But one of the things I think we still fall down in, both personally with our parents, with our kids, and in our work, is we talk about our feelings, and you only have to go on TikTok to, or any social media platform to talk about my feelings are valid, which they are. But we then don't talk a lot about how, theory into practice. So if I'm in a corporate meeting and I need to feel my feels, can I just vent out to everybody in that meeting? No, you can't. TikTok would tell you otherwise. But in reality, are you going to get the outcome you want if you're having verbal diarrhea about your feelings in a meeting that maybe is not the right context, right? So we've got, the emotional intelligence pillars are the self-awareness, self-management is something that we talk a lot about self-awareness. 80% of the content on social media is about self-awareness. We don't really talk about the self-management part of how to implement that into real life. So if I have the right to tell you how I'm feeling, then you also have the right to tell me how you're feeling. It's not a one-way street, right? So, my feelings are valid, absolutely, but yours also are. So social awareness and social management. And then Timothy Clark, who does a lot of work on fostering psychological safety, he talks about two other pillars that aren't as well discussed, but I think fundamentally important is, even before awareness and management, is we need to look at our self-regard. What do we think about ourselves and our social regard? Because if you're in a meeting, say you're a very big time entrepreneur who may be going to a meeting with people, and you might think quite poorly of these people. Maybe you don't think that they're as smart as you, or maybe you don't think that they're going to be able to give you what you want. So you feel like the meeting's a waste of time or something like that. How do you show up into that meeting versus the concept that everyone has value, and I'm going to go show up, regardless of whether this is going to extend it, how do I present myself into that meeting? You're going to have, if you've got a different level of social regard for everybody that you meet, doesn't mean you'll like everyone, but you go in and aware of that. But also, if you don't have that self-regard, how are you showing up into these situations? And how do we work on that? So the regard, the awareness, and the management. And on top of that, the emotional agility. Susan David talks about the agility, and I see that all the time. I'm stuck in my feelings, or I'm stuck in this thought that I can't move from. How to be agile into, thinking again, choosing again, all of those kind of things. So in nurturing, again, we start with self. What do we notice about ourselves in that regard? What do I do well, and what can I build off, and what do I struggle with, and what do I need to, maybe change or eliminate, or get some help with to do better in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
So
Love it. A lot of amazing points here that I'm sure we could delve much deeper into all of them.
yeah,
I love what you were talking about, what we look at other people, right, in that meeting, and those judgments or those assumptions, right, that are made. And one thing that has helped me, I think, is the lens of curiosity. Is like
yeah, for sure.
someone's being this way. Oh, why are they being this way? I'm curious. Let me ask some questions about it instead of making a judgment. And all of a sudden, it becomes very open, right, in that conversation.
Yeah.
Well,
And curiosity is not condoning. So I'm curious as to why they're doing it. Doesn't mean that I have to like that they're doing it, right? And in the coaching world, we talk about unconditional positive regard, that people are doing the best that they can with what they've got. Again, is not condoning behavior. So, I'm going to give Athin the benefit of the doubt that when we had that conversation the other day, that you didn't mean to hurt my feelings, that kind of stuff, because there is a difference between intention and impact. But just because they didn't mean it doesn't mean it gives you a pass. Your job is to go back and repair, because the impact was there was an issue, regardless of whether it's your intention. But also understanding there's a disconnect, and being able to hold space for that. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. That was not my intention, but I can understand how maybe that didn't come across the way that I meant. can I circle back with you and sit down and have this conversation with you and have a do-over and try and work through that? And so much we know is where things break down is communication, right? Or we've interpreted somebody, that intention impact piece, or we've decided for them about, text messages and emails, really good example. We've inferred meaning from that text message or that email communication that actually isn't maybe accurate. But going in and going, people are doing the very best they can. So then with that lens of curiosity. So we noticed the other day when you did this thing, I felt really uncomfortable. Can you tell me, can you help me understand why you may have brought that up? Or can you help me understand why you made that decision when normally you would talk to me about that before you would make that decision? It softens the conversation. People are less likely to be defensive. People are less likely defensive if they feel like that maybe you're stuffed up versus you're doing it to them on purpose. So we can create all these different, stories. So the next pillar is fearlessness, how to work through fearlessness. I could go on all day about this, and I know we've got a limited time, so I'll run through the other one. We've got innovation, we've got nobility. So we don't talk about, and off air before we were talking about the fact that, a lot of social media ads and stuff like that work on scarcity. But if we come from the premise of nobility, the fact that we come from a service, my job here is to serve you, to serve my buyer, to serve my community, to serve my whoever, then you're going to operate differently in the way that you lead versus if you're like, well, this is about me and what I need. So nobility is something that is almost like a humble kind of model of leadership. And that's not to say that you can't be proud and you can't be, out loud and, if you're an extrovert, be extroverted. Don't, it's not about that. It's around that underlying intention around what you're trying to do. Then we've got influence. So again, that's that communication, having strong psychological safety. It doesn't matter if you're in corporate leadership where psychological safety is discussed a lot, entrepreneurship, which I don't think there's a very good connection. I'd love to do more on that in terms of how to create psychologically safe environments for entrepreneurship environments, which are often high, energy, high innovation, fast-paced kind of space, but we get further if we get that really solid thing. Even in parenting, even in relationships, if we create a strong base of psychological safety, it's about creating influence, because I'm more likely to open up to you around something that I'm having a challenge with, which will then foster that innovation and creativity if I've got that psychological safety with you versus this person over here I don't feel safe with. I have that conversation. Transformation. And the other thing that I talk about a lot is the ecosystem. And we were talking about this, about our shared common people that we are, in networks with, is that my network and my ecosystem has changed in the last few years and it's not that they're bad people. It's the fact that the people in my journey now, what I need looks different to what I needed 10 years ago. And it's about who are the people that support you and genuinely support you. Versus supporting you to the level of their comfort. And when you exceed that level of comfort, they may be trying to shrink you a little bit. So that ecosystem that you've got around you is really, really so imperative. So infinite really starts with that self, and that ecosystem at the end really talks about, okay, so in order for you to be all of these things, have your really strong sense of identity, you're very clear on who you are, you've got these skills, you've moved through those spheres. Who are the people in your world that are going to support you to get to that next level where you want to go? And so that's part of the process that we work through in both individually, teams and organizations, in terms of ecosystem support. And like I said, it's just such a powerful model, because then when you get a new role or you go into a new business, guess what? Because it's infinite, you can go back and revisit, what does this look like now? And assess which pillars are the key ones to focus on, because there is so much stuff around personal development out there. It can feel really overwhelming, and that can stop people from actually even starting. But if you're like, okay, I think the pillar for this quarter I need to focus on is my ecosystem. Or my pillar for this quarter is I actually need to go back and really assess who I am. Am I showing up as the person I want to be? And is the work that I'm doing aligning with that vision that I have about who I want to be? Or do I actually need to recalibrate that and go, you know what, I actually need to pivot in my work, or I need to reassess my identity, or whatever that looks like. So being able to either do one pillar at a time or look at the whole picture. So it works for the visionary thinkers that are big picture thinkers, and then it works down to the people that need a bit of micro, one step at a time, and anywhere in between.
Yeah, love it, Kylie. Amazing model, everything there. I love the ecosystem part, because this is your environment dictates everything, right? It's just like having one bad apple in an organization, can really affect like a lot of people. But I think I was seeing a thing recently where in a child, right, the biggest determining
Yeah.
factor on if they will be successful is the people they hang around. Doesn't matter necessarily what the parents. Yes, the parents become part of it, but it's actually who they hang around because they're around them most of the time, and that will impact on what direction they go to, right? And then that's the
Yeah.
same in an organization of being in a great organization, I guess, of being around people that are going to allow you to show your gifts at the same time, right?
Yeah. And I think the other part, Marianne Williamson says your playing small does not serve the world, but some people are very comfortable for you to play small. It serves them for you to play small. But what we do is when we give ourselves permission to not play small and to do these things, then we actually give others permission to do the same. So watching other people grow and, you're like, oh, wow, they're doing that. I can do that. And so, it doesn't serve you to play small, but it certainly doesn't serve the others around you, despite sometimes there are those Debbie Downers or the tall poppy syndrome that's very rife in Australia that think so. But in actual fact, you modeling the way, and that's one of the things that I talk a lot about is when people at work come and go, how do you do that? I've actually done it, right? So I model the examples. I'm not going to ask you to do a strategy that I haven't tried myself. I'm not going to ask you to do these things because I want to be that model to say, well, if I can do this, you can do this too, and give permission. And my clients often go, oh, wow, you've now opened up this world of possibility by showing me what's possible, by actually showing you a pathway to what that could look like, right? For them, personalized to them. It's not about copying what I do or anything like that. It's about personalizing to them. But sometimes sharing those stories allows that possibility to go into people's mind where previously they couldn't conceptualize what that could look like.
Yeah, I love it. I want to get into influence a little bit more because I think this is a really important one. Because
Mm.
to me, whether you're a business owner, whether you're in a leadership position, you're building relationships, right, with people, whether it's for partners, for clients, for internal people, and you've got to be able to influence them, in a positive way to, move
Mm.
forward, whatever that is, right? So I think it's a really important way of that, maybe that trust factor, right? So I'd love to know your thoughts a little bit more around that influence side of things and the importance of it as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that gets in the way of influence is ego, because we get so caught up on what we want, we forget that we're trying to create this win-win outcome here. And we sit there and go, and a really good example that I share a lot is when I've got to give somebody feedback, right? Anyone that's worked in a job has, in life even, but in a job has received feedback at some point. How many times, if you were going to have a meeting with your team leader, how often did your team leader say, hey, Athin, when we do our feedback sessions, I'd really like to know what's the best way for you to receive feedback?
Mhm.
That's a big fat zero, mostly when I'm talking to people, right?
Yeah.
The reason that's so important is what's the goal of feedback? The goal of feedback is to improve an outcome. So to create influence, to change an outcome. So in order for you to receive that information in a way that's going to allow you to process it to improve your practice to then improve the outcome, you need to be able to receive it in a way that works for you. So if your boss is a waffly, person that likes to whiffle waffle and you like straight to the point kind of stuff, you're going to go, oh my God, I have to sit and listen to them 45 minutes talk about, their cats before we get to the point. Just give me the bullet points. Just send it to me in an email. I'll go do it. Right. Or there's other people that I need to know what I've done really well, and then tell me what I can work on. And then also remind me again of what I'm doing well, because I'm so hypersensitive to criticism that if you start going, oh, Athin, you didn't do this and you didn't do this, I'm not listening because I've just gone into my little inner child story and I've just gone flashback to when I'm 6 and I'm getting in trouble by dad. Can't actually hear you. So how often do we sit there and understand how our behavior impacts the outcome that we're seeking by the way that we show up in that conversation? Have we created an environment where we're creating strong psychological safety? Have we got enough? Brene Brown talks about the marbles in the marble jar of trust. Because I know when I sat in school, we had very complex kids that had been through really complex trauma and didn't trust anybody. When somebody had to have the conversation about something, do you know what we did? We sat down and said, who's got the best relationship with this person? Now, I was the boss. theoretically, hierarchically, I could sit that kid and go, well, I'm the boss of this program. You need to sit down. You need to do this with me. And it's non-negotiable. But was I going to get the outcome by doing that? Sometimes that wasn't the way, because actually that person over there had a better relationship with that kid to sit down and have it. And he was going to listen to that person. Sometimes it was me. So we'd sit down and have that conversation. Now, in corporate and workplaces, that doesn't always happen because your team leader is your team leader and you've got to suck it up. But how often do you sit down out of a feedback session and have a conversation around what's your communication preferences? What's your conflict resolution preferences and styles? And what's your feedback preferences and styles? And having done this in a number of organizations, it is a massive game changer to be able to get influence with your teams, because now they feel heard automatically, the fact that you've actually taken the time to understand that. The second part of that is you're increasing the level of psychological safety in the organization, because when we're talking about conflict resolution, we need conflict to get innovation. If we're all sitting there going, oh, yes, no, everything's fine. Yep. Everyone's stuck. No one's getting the movement that they need. So I actually need to say, hey, Athin, I really didn't like the way that happened today. And I need to be confident to have that conversation with you and go, I know that at the end of the day, you and I are still going to be good. We can have that conversation about that thing and you and I are okay. But we haven't actually sat down beforehand and said, hey, Athin, what do you like about, are you a conflict lover or are you a conflict avoider? And, if I need to bring up something, because, we're wanting to innovate and create this project and we're wanting to get to 9 figures in the next 12 months, we're going to have to work really hard and we're not always going to have the same idea, because if we're truly going to have innovative practice, we need people that think differently. We need diverse thinkers on the board, which means that we're not always going to think the same. And that's okay. That's actually good. But we need a process where it falls down is when we don't have a way to communicate through that difference of styles and different preferences. And there's no good or bad. It's just different. Right. So I think that's really key to all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love it. The pre-framing and setting it up, for success in those ways, which is really important. Let's talk a little bit more on emotional intelligence here, right? Because I think this is a really important one. And, I know from my perspective being, let's just use the demographic old school way of thinking, that the old Aussie man way, right? Of, you'll be right. Don't necessarily show emotion or don't understand how to process emotion more, right? That was a lot of me growing up and, had to learn this part of it. And I think, a lot of people can get triggered on things and understanding how to respond to that in the workplace, because that can happen. So I'd love to know your thoughts around these instances in emotional intelligence, how we can, be better in those spots.
Yeah. So first of all, you have to have strong psychological safety. I think that's the key to any of these convocations. You can't just go into an organization and go, so we're going to do emotional intelligence today, because the people that have grown up the same way that you have grown up are going to go, I don't do emotions. No, we're not doing that conversation, right? So I think that's a really big part of it. So we've got to get the foundations right before we deep dive into things, because that thing that's going to require that vulnerability from you is raw, and we often haven't learnt it. We certainly haven't been taught it. So we're kind of flying blind, and that uncertainty creates fear, and that fear creates those triggers and all of those kind of things. So one of the things that I think is really, really important is even going back to foundationally, what does it, what you mentioned earlier, that curiosity, what would it have meant to you? Like, what would have happened to you if you had shared your emotions when you were younger?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I would have been able to express them more. It was funny. My wife showed me a piece of paper that had like 100 emotions on it. I'm like, what do you mean there's this many emotions? I don't know what you're talking about. There's not even 10 from what I could think of, like, in my mind. So it's that awareness of what these feelings and what it is.
Yeah, that's one of the activities I actually do with people. I actually get people to write down how many emotions can you label, and then we flip over the paper and they're like, what is this? Because I think one of the things is, and I work with a lot of people that anger has been their go-to emotion. I work with a lot of men that have had anger as their go-to emotion. I work with a lot of young people that anger is their go-to emotion. And I was talking to a lady yesterday, only just about the same thing, because it's less common in women, but it certainly is not exclusive to men as a situation. And I said to her, so growing up, because you didn't have the language of emotions, every time something happened that made you anxious or overwhelmed or scared even, you channeled into expressing through anger. And so now your body only has one response to all of these feelings because you can't actually label anything accurately. And I think the other one is, how are you feeling implies that we've got one emotion going on at one time. But in actual fact, I'm often, if you look at the emotion wheel or that list that, you are showing you, you will actually often feel more than one emotion. So not, what are you feeling at the moment, as opposed to how are you feeling, which just unconsciously elicits a happy, sad, tired, busy response, one emotion. Very rarely are we just feeling one thing. And so we have to normalize the fact that you're probably feeling a bit of a mishmash of a whole thing. And that's confusing in and of itself. But the other part of that, I think, is really going into what are the behaviors that you're showing. So, people that present as anger. I remember working with this young person many years ago, and I said, we're going to write down, and he was very physically violent, like very aggressive. There was lots of physical violence. So we're going to write down all the things that make you angry, and we're going to write them all down. And I said, what are we going to call it? And he called it the S list. And we're going to call it this list. And I'm like, okay, cool. He goes, you're going to need a bigger book, Kylee. There's so many things that make me angry. And when we wrote it down, and I started going, I then got the emotions, all the different things. I said, let's label this correctly. So when this happens, is that what you actually feel, or is there something else that more accurately represents what you feel? And out of the whole entire list, only one thing actually made him angry. So the problem was that everyone was responding to him. So the strategies of responding to him were all anger. So in an organization space, if you've got the guy that loses his for shizzle and slams the things on the desk and throws the stapler across the room or whatever when he gets frustrated, or, we assume is angry about something, we respond to him as if he's an angry person. And, we have zero tolerance for violence. We have zero, all those things. But how often have we actually sat down and gone, so what you looked like was that you were really, really angry, but I'm wondering what actually was going on. And let's, label it correctly, because you've got to name it to be able to change it. So you've got to catch it first. And one of the other things that I talk about a lot is I work on a behavior escalation scale. So we know what dysregulated looks like. Like if I'm losing my shiz, it's not pretty, right? And again, going like, nobody wants to do a poor job. How often do you wake up in the morning and go, yeah, I want to feel like that today. I want to feel really dysregulated, and I want to be feeling, and for some people that's a shutdown. For some people that's a blow up. But, in 100% of the people that I've asked, do you like the feeling that you have when you're in that state? And the answer is overwhelmingly, no, I do not. So what have we got to do? Be proactive, catch it earlier. What are the signs that you're heading up there, and address it earlier? And if we don't recognize those feelings in our body, how can we? And I did an activity recently at an organization, and I actually say to people, we have these 4 stages on the scale that I use. And I say to people, what does it look like and sound like and feel like in this state? And people are really good at articulating when they lose their fascism or they're in that dysregulated zone, they can tell me. I then ask them, what does it, so the very first zone is, what does it look like when you are calm? What does it look like and sound like and feel like when you are regulated, calm, relaxed? And do you know what? People couldn't answer me because it was been so long since they've actually felt a state of calm. They're like, I don't even know what to put in this column. They could feel anxious and they could feel dysregulated out easily, but they couldn't actually fill out what it looked like to be calm. And I think one of the post-COVID longer term ramifications is we operated in this new normal, or we went through this chaos, but we've never really gone back and redefined a new baseline for ourselves around what does calm look like for me in this new world order kind of idea. And there's so much chaos in the world all of the time that it's very easy to get swept along for the ride. But when I'm calm, what do I look like? What do I sound like? And what do I feel like? Because if I don't know what that looks like, how do I know what I'm moving back to then move through? And we know that if we're going to operate in our zone of genius, we also have to be in a regulated state to be able to do that. And if we spend all our time in a dysregulated state, we will operate for a while. We can hold it for a while, but at some point we'll burn out. So how do we move back into that? And so these are the conversations I have with people. And for people that are not really in touch with their feelings, the conversation focus on, well, what do you look like when you're angry? Or what do you look like? What do you think you look like? And what was the outcome you were trying to get in that moment? And did that behavior get that outcome? What would a different, in order to get that outcome, what could you do differently? And I think that's the part that we work through, because part of it is we assume that people should know this stuff because they're 40 years old and been an assistant director for 10 years. But if you've never been taught, I often say to people, they're like, well, they should know that this is unacceptable. I'm like, they do. But how do they know what else to do if they've never been taught? You assume that they've had access to that learning and knowledge on how to manage and regulate their emotions. But how do you know that? Just because they're 40 years old doesn't mean they've had access to that opportunity to learn. So we just go back. And again, from curiosity and unconditional positive regard, we go back to those basics and actually ask what that looks like.
Yeah, I love it. So true. Amazing points here that you shared with us today, Kylee. So much gold. And I guess as we're starting to wrap up here today, what one key piece of advice would you like to give to everyone watching and listening today?
Yeah, one of the things I always talk to people about is, as part of my reflective practice, I ask people to go, what's working well? How can I do more? And what's not working? And what do I need to change, review, reduce, or eliminate? And people always want to go on the column that's not what's not working well for me. They want to sit over there. They want to jump over to that lane really quickly. And I think we don't spend enough time acknowledging the good and what's going well in our lives, both personally, organizationally, in our team. And how can we do more of that stuff? So I would really, really encourage people. First of all, it's always about having a reflective practice. Do you have a reflective practice? Is that reflective practice working for you? What would your reflective practice need to look like for you to be able to hold space for yourself in that conversation? If you can't do it for yourself, who's in your ecosystem that can support you to process that out loud? The second part is what's going well in your world, because we know our brains, our reticular activating system works on the filtering system. So if you're looking for bad, guess what? You find it. But if you're looking for good, guess what? You also find it. So if we can start to snowball, and there's always something good, even if your world is chaotic and hectic. It could be the fact that you had a warm cup of coffee in the morning. It could be the fact that you had a doona last night that kept you warm. Start small and then snowball that into bigger things if you're getting stuck.
Yeah, love it. So true. That gratitude side of things too. So we connected through our networks. We learned about your awesome journey from being in the education industry to now being the founder and chief vision officer of Elements for Success. Amazing woman, so knowledgeable. You've shared so much gold in here with your infinite leadership model and everything else with us today that's actionable as well. And I'm sure you continue to empower people of all ages so they can develop the confidence, skills, and tools they're required to live a life of their design and purpose. Very grateful that we connected and look forward to connecting further. So Kylee, how can people find you, get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Kylee Leota, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Elements4 Success. And my website, www.elementsforsuccess.com.au. Please, I'd love to connect with you and support you and your infinite journey moving forward.
Love it. Definitely check out Kylee there on social media, her website there. Powerful stuff to really take your leadership to that next level. And it's been a pleasure interviewing you today. Thanks for being on the Business Growth Show.
Thanks, Athin. It was so lovely to see you again. And so I just get so much energy from these conversations. So thank you so much.
Thank you for watching and listening to the Business Growth Show, where we talk about everything on business growth. And please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Athin Cassiotis, or visit my website, athincassiotis.com. And if you want to grow and scale your business, you can reach out to me on any platform to see if we're a good fit. So until next time, remember that our business grows where we learn skills and take action using them in spite of fear. So let's create wealth and freedom together.